Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening again. I'm Bob Galen, and this is a new idea and a new presentation for me. It's been brewing in our coaching, in my coaching and my thinking for a little while, and I'll share what that's about. But it's focusing on quality and testing in Agile teams and the balance of that from a strategy perspective. And so I want to talk a little bit about the genesis of the idea, where it came from. First of all, I think the first point is I've seen way too many teams who are just testing without a map or a plan for improvement. So too many Agile teams are focusing just on testing activities and not on quality activities. They're not trying to build in quality. They're not doing inspections, and they're not doing reviews, and they're not collaborating effectively from a review perspective in refining their designs and refining their strategies, their development strategies, and their test strategies. And I think that's a really common practice. So that's the initial thing that I saw is, everyone thinks that the idea is to test in quality, and the testing activity is really crucial. And while that's important, I want the teams to sort of build in quality. That's absolutely part of the Agile mindset and part of the lean mindset of where we want to be. I've also seen Agile adoption as mostly developer-centric or technology-centric. So they drive, and then testing, and what I mean by testing is QA, or the quality assurance, or the quality engineering, or the testers are along for the ride. So you strap yourself in, it's sort of a roller coaster ride, and you're following the development lead, or you're following the technology lead. That could be the development teams themselves. That could be a VP of development. I'm not saying they're bad. They're not bad people, but they're not thinking from a quality point of view and from a testing point of view. And so if you're going to create a strategy of how do we transform, how do we become Agile, I don't think you can do that just with blinders on, looking at it from just a development-centric point of view. We need testers. We need models. And the three pillars might help with that of, hey, let's not only think of the technology aspects. Let's not just get perky and excited about continuous deployment. But let's also talk about, quality and automation and how do we build in quality. And I think that's part of a balanced strategy. And again, you'll see that theme throughout. Hopefully you'll see that theme throughout the presentation. And then, like I was saying, where's that focus on quality and the how or practices and tactics of quality is something that's very often missing. So those gaps, those observations I had were a genesis point for the three pillars model. And I've mentioned this word at least 3 times probably so far, and I talked about balance. That I've learned that balance is incredibly important, and if there's a key word or there's a key term or there's a key concept in the 3 pillars, it's trying to drive balance in your testing and quality strategies. So I'll make that point more specifically in a sad tale. Not that long ago, I was invited, a little while back, I was invited to a very large financial firm here. I live in North Carolina, and it happened to be a local client, an incredibly prestigious and large financial firm. Invited me in to look around. It was part coaching engagement, but just part showing off what they were doing in a positive way. And I'm very interested in learning from teams that are doing Agile well. And I was excited to be invited in. I was excited to be partnering and observing their teams. And one of the things that they were focusing on was acceptance test-driven development, or ATDD. And they were using Cucumber, this particular company. The predominant language or the predominant tool they were using to achieve ATDD was Cucumber. And Gherkin is a language or a phrasing model for phrasing your acceptance tests in Cucumber. And they were all over the place. They had acceptance tests everywhere. There were thousands of them running. They were producing tens and tens of them per day. They had information radiators running. They were showing, acceptance tests, Cucumber tests running and passing and going green and going red. If you have an Agile background, you realize that that's an incredibly exciting place to be. So walking through the teams, seeing acceptance tests incrementing in coverage. Almost every hour, teams were checking in tests, and it was very vibrant and very technology focused. And I was incredibly excited about it, because to me that's a hard thing to achieve from an Agile point of view, is automation in general and acceptance tests and using Cucumber. Many teams talk about it, but to have it on the scale that these folks were using it was incredibly exciting, and sort of an indication of maturity. So I was glad to be there. But then a day or so later, the second day, I was invited into a grooming or a backlog refinement session with the team, which was all good. They were just exposing tactics and patterns to me. And I sat down, and again, I was equally excited. I was thinking to myself, well, gosh, if these guys are so mature to be doing ATDD at the level that they're doing, I mean, they probably can write stories in their sleep. They've got to be writing these sort of incredibly terse, incredibly vibrant, and incredibly collaborative stories. The acceptance tests must be, short and succinct, but value driven, and the product owners, must be just nailing down exactly what's valuable to them. And I was surprised that this team, and I'm not exaggerating, this is a real story, that literally the team couldn't write a story. They couldn't write a user story to save themselves. And I tried to prevent my jaw from hitting the table in front of me. And if you know anything about ATDD and Cucumber and acceptance test-driven development, you know that there's something that should be happening before that, which is what I would call manual story writing, or the team should be very adept at identifying stories, and they should be very adept at writing acceptance criteria or acceptance tests on a story-by-story basis. That's part of that user story model. And so I had this aha moment. I was just thinking about what I had seen in day 1 to day 2, and I realized that the ATDD was not grounded, was not connected to the stories. They were using Cucumber as what I would call functional testing device. And their goals and metrics, as it turned out, were driving them towards test coverage in Cucumber. But they were out of balance with the practices. They should have been just as mature writing user stories as they were in automating acceptance tests. And in fact, they had put, the cart. They had put the cart before the horse. The cart in this case is user stories, and the horse is once you can articulate manually or writing down acceptance tests, then clearly you can automate them. But they weren't doing that. They weren't connecting them to the product owner. So in a word, they were really broken. They were imbalanced. In some cases, as I looked at the organization, there were some agile practices where they were incredibly advanced and incredibly mature, or fairly mature, and there were some agile practices that they were incredibly immature, and there were some agile practices that I thought that they weren't practicing at all. They weren't focusing on them at all. So that inspired me. I wanted to communicate to this team. I was trying to figure out how can I communicate balance to them. And this isn't the first firm where I had seen this, but it forced me to think about the anti-patterns that I've been seeing and the patterns, and it forced me to think about how can we communicate something to this organization and to other organizations that will help them to think about agile quality and testing in a more holistic way. And that's where the 3 pillars model came from. I'm going to click it up here. You can see it now, or hopefully you can see it. Hopefully it's not too small for you. But there's 3 pillars, and then there's a baseline set of foundational characteristics that I'm going to go over as well. So I'm going to give you a flavor for the pillars now, and then we'll go into each one, and we'll drill down into each pillar and talk about it in more detail as we go throughout the presentation. The first pillar is development and test automation. It's what I think of as the technology pillar. It's the programmatic